In this lesson, we'll continue our review of Writing Test 10, Section 2. We're still on the second passage, Keep Student Volunteering, Volunteer Around Problem 18. However, most research looks at students who volunteer in general, not making a distinction between students who are required to volunteer by their schools and those who volunteer willingly. One recent study by Sarah E. Helms, Assistant Professor of Economics at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, did focus specifically on mandatory volunteering. We had the word compulsory several times earlier in this passage, which means mandatory. This is an exact synonym. If you look at the other choices, coercive, this is really an element of force. And then we see C is forcible. So first of all, these are both too extreme, but you also can't distinguish between them. And imperative just means very important, so that's not accurate. It's just mandatory, which is a synonym for compulsory. She found that students who are required to volunteer rush to complete their service hours in early high school, they then did significantly less regular volunteer work in 12th grade than the service hours of those not required to volunteer. So we have a couple of questions. So 19, the way it appears, she found that students who are required to volunteer rush to complete their service hours in early high school. That's an independent clause, they then did. Another independent clause. Classic comma splice. You cannot have that with a comma. It's a run-on sentence. You can cure it. Now, you could use a period. The they, you want to be cautious about starting a sentence with a they. It could be ambiguous, but even more glaring, do you need punctuation between they and then? Right? Why do you need any punctuation? They then. So this one is wrong. We could use a semicolon to cure the run-on. They then, or they then, without any punctuation, to do significantly less regular volunteer work. No punctuation. It's just continuous, right, after the semicolon. So it's D for that one. And then in 20, they then did significantly less regular volunteer work in 12th grade than the service hours of those not required to volunteer. So we're comparing two types of students, the ones who were mandated to volunteer and others who weren't. So you can't compare students. It said then the service hours. That is an inconsistent comparison, right? It's not. You need to compare the same things. So it's not the service hours. It's not the hours. We need to compare the students with other students. So they did less regular volunteer work than did students who were not required. This definitely looks good. And D, you've got compared with. Why do you need compare? Because you already have less, which is giving you a comparison. So this is redundant as well. Then did students, much better choice, so it's B. Helms concluded that compulsory volunteering does not necessarily create lifelong volunteers. So just got a couple more questions here. Instead of requiring students to volunteer, schools have to recognize that not all students are equally well suited to the same activities. And so 21, we want to effectively set up the point in the next sentence. Let's read the next sentence. Many studies show that when schools simply tell students about opportunities for community service and connect them with organizations that need help, more students volunteer of their own free will. So a better solution is just letting them know there's opportunities without forcing them. What would effectively set that up? It's not A, recognize that not all students are equally well suited. Should allow students to spend time participating in athletics or other extracurricular activities. That really doesn't set it up either. Should focus on offering arrangements that make volunteering an easy and attractive choice. This looks good because just telling them about these opportunities, setting up these arrangements, but not forcing them or not mandating them. C is definitely the best choice here. And then 22, the writer wants a conclusion that states the main claim of the passage, which best accomplishes. We know the main point of this passage is, even though volunteering is good, it's not healthy. It's not good to mandate it. The students should elect on their own. So let's take a look. It is imperative that students do their part to find volunteers for the many worthwhile organizations. That misses the point of the whole passage. Schools that do this will produce more engaged, enthusiastic volunteers than schools that require volunteer work. So remember, the last sentence before was saying just letting them know about the opportunities and letting them decide independently is a much better alternative. This looks good to conclude. If schools do that, instead of mandating or making it compulsory, schools, they will produce more engaged, enthusiastic volunteers than the schools that require volunteer work. So the answer here is B.